My name is Vanessa Cole, and I am 27 years old. If you've ever had the people who were supposed to love you most look you in the eye and tell you that you're nothing, then you already know the kind of silence that follows. The kind that isn't peaceful. The kind that strangles. It was a Sunday evening, the kind where the world outside seemed calm, the hum of crickets, the fading glow of the sun slipping behind our neighborhood rooftops. But inside our family's dining room, I was suffocating. The table was set with roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and my mother's famous green bean casserole. My brother sat at the head of the table. Not my father, not even my mother, but him. Darren, the golden child. The one who could do no wrong. I sat 2 seats down, quiet, listening. "Congratulations, Darren," my father said proudly, raising his glass. "Landing that internship at the firm is proof you've got what it takes. You're the future of this family." My mother chimed in quickly, her voice soft but sharp enough to cut me. "Finally, someone who won't embarrass us. Someone we can depend on." They didn't even glance at me. I felt my fork freeze against the plate. My pulse hammered in my ears. I had been working 2 jobs, taking night classes, trying to build something for myself. None of that mattered to them. Not the late nights, not the exhaustion, not the quiet victories I kept tucked away like fragile glass. "Vanessa's still trying to figure herself out," my mother added casually, her eyes flicking toward me as if I were a stain on the tablecloth. "Not everyone is cut out to succeed." Darren smirked, leaning back in his chair. "She's right, Mom. Vanessa's different. Not everyone can carry weight." I wanted to slam my fist against the table, to scream, to remind them that I had carried plenty. Bills, responsibilities, the weight of their neglect. But instead I stared at the plate in front of me, my appetite rotting. Then my father delivered the final blow. "You've always been a dreamer, Vanessa. But dreams don't pay the bills. Darren is our pride. You've been nothing but a disappointment." The word lodged in my chest like a blade. Disappointment. The laughter that followed. Darren's smug chuckle, my mother's thin smile, blurred into background noise. My hands trembled beneath the table, and I dug my nails into my palms until I felt the sting of skin breaking. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just sat there, letting their words brand me. But inside something shifted. That was the day I stopped trying to prove my worth to them. That was the day I realized that if they saw me as useless, then I would build something so undeniable, so unshakable, that the world itself would remember me, even if my own parents never did. And as I pushed back from the table, their laughter still echoing behind me, one promise burned in my chest like fire. One day they'll choke on the word useless. Vanessa walks away from the table, not saying a word, but the audience knows it's the moment her silent war begins. Hang on, before I tell you what happened next, make sure you've subscribed and left your thoughts in the comments. This part gets intense. If you grew up in my family, you learned fast that love was conditional, and the conditions were written in Darren's favor. I remember being 9 years old, standing in the kitchen with glue on my hands and hope in my chest. I had spent days building a model for the science fair, a water filtration system with layers of charcoal, sand, and gravel. It worked. I tested it, labeled every part, even wrote up neat notes on index cards. I thought my parents would beam with pride. That morning, Darren strolled in late, holding a wrinkled poster board he'd barely touched. He hadn't done the work, but my mom still clapped her hands together like he'd invented electricity. "We'll fix it in the car," she said, gathering markers. I asked for help carrying my model, but she waved me off. "You're independent, sweetheart. You've got it." That afternoon, Darren came home with a ribbon for Most Creative Presentation. My project sat in the corner, unnoticed. At dinner, Dad took picture after picture of Darren holding that ribbon. The camera never turned my way. That was the first lesson. In our house, Darren was the star and I was the shadow. By middle school, I had learned to disappear into usefulness. I did his homework when he was too busy. I edited his essays, helped him with speeches, even slipped my own ideas into his projects. I told myself it didn't matter, that as long as someone was succeeding, maybe it counted for both of us. But when I heard Dad say, "That's my boy," always going places while looking at Darren, something inside me cracked. High school only widened the gap. Darren got a shiny new bike for his birthday after wrecking the last one texting and writing. I got a thrift store sweater, tags still dangling. Darren crashed his car freshman year, and Dad bought him another. When I asked if I could join a summer art program that cost a few $100s, Mom said, "We don't have the money for extras." I learned how to work for my extras. Babysitting, tutoring, selling old clothes online. I scraped together enough to buy secondhand supplies and books. At night, when the house was quiet, I filled sketchbooks with designs and plans. I dreamed of building something real, something no one could take from me. But Darren always found a way to take anyway. When he applied to Leadership Council, I recognized entire paragraphs from an essay I had written in his application. He got the position. Mom framed his certificate in the hallway, right next to Dad's old sports trophies. My name wasn't anywhere. The cracks deepened in my 20s. I graduated college, landed a modest job at a creative agency, and started sketching out my dream. A modular pop-up studio where small brands and local artists could showcase their work. I spent nights researching permits, budgets, branding strategies. I lived off takeout noodles while I poured everything into that folder on my laptop labeled miscellaneous. Meanwhile, Darren floated from one half-baked idea to another. Real estate, crypto, networking events. He was charming, slick, magnetic in a way that made people forgive his failures. My parents adored it. "He's a risk-taker," they said, like recklessness was bravery. When I finally pitched my first idea for a grant program, I thought maybe, finally, I'd prove myself. I made it to the top 5. Almost. No ribbon, no spotlight, but proof I was onto something. I taped that rejection letter inside a notebook as fuel. A month later, Darren landed an opportunity through one of Dad's golf buddies. A marketing firm took him under its wing, not for talent, but for his last name and his smile. Suddenly he was posting rooftop selfies and captions like "Hustle never sleeps." My parents ate it up. I told myself to keep going. To stay in my lane, build brick by brick. But every time my phone buzzed with his smug updates or Mom called to brag about him, I felt that old crack widen just a little more. The final fracture came one night, 3 weeks before everything blew up. Mom called asking if I could hand over my old laptop, because Darren needed it more for some presentation at work. I told her no. She sighed so deeply it felt like a verdict. "Your brother's career is important, Vanessa. Be supportive." An hour later, Darren texted me himself. "Bring the laptop. The firm's doing a feature on local entrepreneurs. And I told them about your little pop-up idea. Might throw you a mention in a blog." "You're welcome. Your little pop-up idea." That was it. The childhood science fair, the stolen essays, the invisible birthdays, the Be Grateful lectures. All of it crashed into that one message. He didn't see me as a person. Not a sister. Not a creator. Just a convenient source to siphon from, then discard. And that was the moment I stopped being the shadow. I didn't reply to his message. Instead, I opened my laptop, pulled out the folder I'd been hiding for years, and whispered to myself, "It's mine. And this time I'm not letting him take it." Before we go any further, click subscribe and let me know in the comments. What would you have done in my shoes? The night it all came crashing down didn't begin like a storm. It began like a celebration. The city was lit up, every skyscraper glowing against the dark, and I was standing in heels that pinched my toes, clutching the strap of my thrifted purse. Darren had invited me to what he called a little networking mixer, at the very firm where he'd been climbing the ladder on charm alone. I almost didn't go. Every instinct screamed it would end badly. But curiosity, and maybe that gnawing hunger to finally be seen, dragged me there. The venue was on the top floor of a glass tower. Music pulsed low in the background, laughter bubbled from champagne glasses, and waiters wove between clusters of suits with trays of hors d'oeuvres. I walked in quietly, hoping to blend, but then I saw it. Banners, digital screens, glossy portfolios laid out on tables. And at the center of it all, my project. My sketches, my branding mock-ups, the modular studio design I had spent years refining. It was all there. Polished, reprinted, with his name plastered across the top. Darren Lawson, Innovator of the Year. The world tilted. For a second I thought I might faint. I stumbled closer, my eyes racing across every stolen line of text. He hadn't even bothered to change the phrasing. Words I had typed on sleepless nights glared back at me, shining under spotlights. People murmured around me, praising his vision. A woman in a red blazer leaned over the display, smiling wide. "This is brilliant. He's a genius." My chest burned. I found him near the bar, glass in hand, surrounded by colleagues who hung on his every word. He was laughing, animated, alive in the way only Darren could be when the world gave him applause. When he spotted me, his smile flickered, then widened like this was just another game. "Vanessa," he said, pulling me into the circle like I was a guest, not the author of everything he was stealing. "Everyone, this is my sister. The one who inspired me to think differently. She's got a creative streak, don't you, Ness?" The way he said it inspired me, made bile rise in my throat. I forced my voice steady. "This is my work, Darren. My idea. My designs. You stole them." For a moment silence hung heavy. Then Darren laughed. Actually laughed like I was telling a joke. "She's got a wild imagination, doesn't she?" he told the group. "Always cooking up little side projects. But hey, family inspires family, right?" The group chuckled along, sipping their drinks, the tension diffused by his charisma. And just like that, I was painted as the silly, jealous sister making noise at her brother's big night. I felt the room closing in on me. My skin prickled, my palms slick with sweat. I tried again, my voice sharper. "Tell them the truth. You didn't build this. You took it from me." His jaw tightened. For a split second, his mask slipped. He leaned closer, voice low enough that only I could hear. "Don't do this here. You'll embarrass yourself. No one's going to believe you over me. Not tonight. Not ever." The words landed like steel bars locking a cage. And the worst part, he was right. I looked around the room, at the polished executives, the glossy portfolios with his name, the adoring smiles. They weren't mine. They were his. He had already rewritten the story, and I was just a footnote. I left before the speeches began. My heels clicked too loud on the marble, my chest so tight I could barely breathe. The city air hit me like a slap, damp and heavy, and I leaned against the cold glass of the building, gasping for control. Inside, Darren was toasting to his future. Outside, I was choking on the ashes of mine. That was my lowest point. The night I realized the brother I had defended, supported, and even envied had carved out his success from my bones and didn't care if I bled to death for it. I walked into the night with nothing but a vow burning in my chest. He thought he had taken everything from me. But I was about to show him what happens when you strip a woman down to nothing, because nothing is where revolutions are born. Before we go any further, click subscribe and let me know in the comments. What would you have done in my shoes? 4 days after that night I couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. Darren's smirk replayed in my mind. His whisper echoing like poison. "No one's going to believe you over me." And for a while I believed him. I sat in my apartment with the curtains drawn, staring at my notebook. The same notebook filled with sketches and notes I had guarded like treasure. Every page felt like a reminder of how foolish I had been to trust him. He'd taken everything, paraded it under his name, and left me with nothing but silence. But grief has a way of burning into anger. And anger, when sharpened, becomes something far more dangerous. I pulled that notebook closer. Page by page, I began marking details only I could know. Draft sketches with corrections in the margins. Coffee stains on prototypes. Even the version numbers I'd scribbled when testing layouts. Darren hadn't just stolen my work. He'd left fingerprints all over the crime scene. And then an idea sparked. If he wanted to build his empire off my back, I'd let him climb higher. I'd let him stack his name on fraud so tall that when it toppled, it would bury him. The first step was research. I spent nights digging through every file, every email, every scrap of evidence I had. I combed through old hard drives, saved cloud documents, even printouts I'd shoved in drawers. The more I looked, the more undeniable it became. The designs were mine, and I had the trail to prove it. The second step was patience. Darren thrived on attention. He couldn't help but show off, and I knew the more public his theft became, the harder his fall would hit. So I waited. I let him take interview after interview, watched his face appear on industry blogs, even sat through a podcast where he bragged about his creative process. Every word he spoke tied the noose tighter around his neck. But it wasn't enough just to have proof. People needed to see it, to feel the betrayal, and not in a quiet office or behind closed doors. No, this had to be public, undeniable, and brutal. That's when I started drafting my plan. I reached out, quietly, strategically, to the very people Darren was desperate to impress. Journalists, bloggers, industry insiders. But I didn't approach them as a victim. I approached them as an insider ready to expose a fraud. I teased them with dates, with files, with the promise of a story bigger than they could imagine. And behind the scenes I worked on my presentation. A showcase of the truth. My truth. Every late night, I stitched together side-by-side comparisons. My original sketches, timestamps intact, against the polished versions Darren flaunted as his own. I recorded videos explaining the evolution of the design, showing the thought process only the real creator could know. By the time I finished, it wasn't just evidence. It was a weapon. Still, doubt gnawed at me. One night, I sat on my floor surrounded by papers, my hands shaking. A voice in my head whispered, "What if no one cares? What if he's right, and I'm just the jealous sister screaming into the void?" But then I remembered the way he had leaned close, the smug certainty in his voice. Not ever. That was what fueled me. That arrogance. That certainty. He thought I wouldn't fight back. He thought I was powerless. And I was about to prove him wrong. The day of Darren's biggest event of the year, the gala where he would unveil his next big project, I closed my laptop, slid the folder of evidence into my bag, and whispered to myself, "Tonight the mask comes off." The gala glittered like something out of a magazine spread. Glass chandeliers dripping gold light, champagne bubbling in crystal flutes, and music floating through the air like it had been rehearsed for months. Everyone who mattered in our industry was there. Investors, journalists, designers, critics. And in the middle of it all, my brother Darren, soaking in the spotlight as if it had been built for him alone. He wore his victory like a second skin. Smiling, shaking hands, posing for photos. Every flash of a camera felt like a nail being hammered deeper into the coffin he didn't yet know was waiting for him. I stood near the back, invisible in a simple black dress, clutching the folder that would end him. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room. Darren stepped onto the stage, holding the microphone with that smug confidence I knew too well. "Tonight," he began, his voice booming, "I present the culmination of years of vision, dedication, and innovation. My team and I." I almost laughed. My team. As if I hadn't been the team. The screens behind him flickered to life, showing sleek designs, polished campaigns, and clips of interviews where he sat in leather chairs, speaking like a visionary. The crowd clapped. Cameras flashed. Darren basked in it, his smirk widening. That was my cue. From the back of the room, I handed a flash drive to the events technician, who had been waiting for my signal. I'd paid him well enough to know he wouldn't hesitate. His hand shook slightly as he slid it into the control system. The screen glitched. Darren froze mid-sentence, confusion flickering across his face. Then, instead of his glossy slideshow, the first of my files appeared. Handwritten sketches. My sketches. The room murmured. Journalists leaned forward, pens poised. On screen, the sketches morphed into annotated drafts, corrections in my handwriting, coffee stains smudging the corners. Then came the time-stamped emails, showing exactly when those designs had been created, years before Darren had ever laid eyes on them. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Darren stammered into the microphone. This is some kind of mistake. But the reel didn't stop. It rolled on, showing side-by-side comparisons. My original drafts versus his polished masterpieces. My video explanations of design choices, proving knowledge only the true creator could have. Even a clip of Darren's own podcast interview, juxtaposed against my notes, exposing his stolen words. The crowd turned. The applause had vanished. The journalists' pens were scribbling like fire. Phones recorded every second. And then the final slide appeared. A single sentence in bold white letters against black. Genius cannot be stolen. It can only be exposed. The silence was deafening. Darren's face drained of color. He dropped the microphone with a clang that echoed through the hall. A journalist shouted, "Is this true?" Another called, "Did you steal her work?" The room buzzed with outrage, the air electric with the thrill of scandal. I stepped forward then, my heels clicking against the polished floor. All eyes turned toward me as I walked to the center, slow and deliberate. "This," I said calmly, gesturing to the screens, "is my work, my years, my vision." My so-called brother built his fame on lies, but lies never last. The cameras swiveled to capture every angle. Darren's mouth opened, then closed, but no sound came. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, shrinking beneath the weight of truth. Security escorted him off stage as reporters swarmed toward me, shoving microphones in my face. Questions flew, flashes blinded, but through it all, I felt only one thing: power. The next morning, headlines blazed across every outlet. Rising star exposed as fraud. Sister reveals truth behind stolen designs. The real genius steps forward. Darren lost everything in a single night. His promotion, his reputation, his so-called empire. Sponsorships dropped him. Investors fled. His name became a cautionary tale whispered in conference halls. And me. I walked into the office days later not as the quiet girl in the corner, but as the rightful owner of my legacy. My designs, my voice, my story. For the first time people saw me. Not as Darren's sister. Not as a shadow. But as the woman who refused to be erased. I built higher from there. My own company, my own projects, my own spotlight. And I made sure he watched every step of it from the outside, powerless, irrelevant. They called me cold. They called me ruthless. And maybe I was. But I'd rather be ruthless than forgotten. Because the day my brother betrayed me for money and fame, he thought he had written my ending. Instead, I wrote his. When people ask me why I did it, why I fought so hard, why I didn't just forgive and forget, I tell them this. Forgiveness is for the innocent. My parents chose to belittle me. My brother chose to betray me. And I chose to rise higher than all of them. Legacy isn't given. It's carved out scar by scar. And mine is one they will never escape.